Welcome to Rock That Relationship, a podcast about all things relationship with Corey and Tracy.
Now let's get real and start creating relationships that rock.
Welcome, everyone, to Rock That Relationship. We are in a season all about relationships, mostly those long-term relationships, the ones that have gone from maybe dating to maybe a more serious kind of a commitment to each other. And so we're going to be looking at marriage. Is it for me today? And we're going to be looking at a list of questions that has been published on a website called Your Tango, which often puts out information about love and romance and some pretty insightful pieces by lots of different authors. And this one is really, there's no real scientific backing that's been provided in this detailed update here. But what I do think is that these questions are interesting. So, Tracy, you and I are going to get a chance to kind of go through these questions and say, what is this question really trying to get at? Is this useful? What other kinds of things should you be asking yourself potentially when you're considering marriage? So this title of this article is called Do Not Marry Someone Until You Can Honestly Answer These 20 Questions. We'll put the link to this article in the show notes as well, but we're going to use this as basically the foundation of today's episode. So Tracy, talking about marriage today. We're there.
Great. Well,
Woohoo!
It's interesting because you said more serious than dating, and that made me think, is there anything really more serious than dating? And I think, for heterosexual people versus gay people or straight people versus gay people, I wonder if those questions are the same also, right? I think marriage has a long history for straight people and not for gay people. And I notice these questions are mostly emotional things. So we don't have to address the legal issues on this episode, but those are also a consideration. So I find it very interesting. It's always interesting, like, whose perspective is the article being written from, and then who's reading it. Does that, is it relevant for them or not?
Right. Yeah, well, when we think about different demographic groups, right, is this for more like young, newlywed kind of, 20-somethings, or what about, retired elderly folks who have other things to consider? So once we get through these questions, let's talk about other kinds of questions that we might throw onto this list if we were going to add to it. So the first question they ask is, would for better or worse make me better or worse?
I think we talk about that all the time, right? Like, we had Coach Dorothy on who talked about your relationship is this. Yeah, your life is the sundae and the relationship is just the cherry on top, right? That person's just the cherry on top. But is that cherry actually improving your life, making your life, leveling you up, or keeping you kind of status quo or bringing you down? And I think that's really important, whether you're going to get married or if you're just wanting to continue to date someone.
Right. I would agree. If you're showing up as like somebody that you're not normally, right? Like you've changed yourself or you morphed yourself enough to like be accepted by this person or fill some kind of standard you think that you should, or you're taking on, I've seen it too, where people take on like habits that they know aren't good for them. They take on unhealthy lifestyle patterns or something, or they give up their dreams or their passions. And, for whatever reasons, people can do that to, compromise, I guess. But for me, I would think that the person you're with should, you should either be the same or better with this person. That's the whole point. You bring out the potential in each other.
The same or better. That's good. Is it weird if people get like better in a relationship? Is that odd? Is there something wrong with that? Is that codependent at all? Or should relationships be in your life to make you and your life better? Like, do we need relationships to level us up?
No, but I do think there's a practicality in that, is being in a relationship where potentially you want to, say, for instance, change jobs. You've been stuck in this job and now you're in a relationship when your partner, your spouse says to you, listen, quit the job you don't like. Go after your dreams. We'll use my income to pay for all the household expenses. So maybe the relationship isn't exactly what is leveling you up, but the circumstance around the relationship is allowing you to go after your dreams. or maybe it's just the emotional support that you get from someone to do that one last amount of encouragement or praise to say, you always wanted to be in a marathon. Just do it. I'll drive you there. I'll make the sign. So I do think that it has the potential to, for your partner to be that kind of cheerleader and supporter to push a little bit beyond, to go after those dreams that you may want and have never realized on your own.
And just being a daily person, right? Like, is this person helping you to be a nicer person, a better person? Something like that, right? Like, right. I think that's the purpose of friends. I mean, friends can be fun, of course. You want to have fun with your friends, but I think a partner should be challenging in the way, the same with friends, to bring you up, to make you, because I think it's hard in this world just to be, you come out of the womb and you're like, I'm going to be the greatest person, but it's hard. It's very difficult. And so I think you have to have people around you who are only going to help you get better and better.
Right. Challenging your thoughts, helping you grow in your thinking. I mean, your partner is the one person you talk to, hopefully, like when you wake up and when you go to bed, and they're the person who's bringing new ideas into your life. Well, let's move on to the next one, because I think this is really good. And we have talked about this on previous episodes in various forms and fashions, is, do we really accept one another? Meaning on two levels. Do I really accept that person is who they are? Not who they could be, who I want them to be, what their potential is. And do they also accept me for who I am, knowing that I may never be whatever they imagine in their eyes, and living up to some kind of standard? What do you think of this question?
I think it's a good one. I mean, do you date someone? I mean, we have talked about it before. Do you really accept the person for who they are? And what do you always say? Will you want to continue dating this person or be with this person if nothing about them will change?
Exactly.
But that's an interesting question, because do you expect to change as a person? Right? Like, I kind of expect myself and the other person to grow. So yes, I would only marry someone if I accepted them. I should say get married again if I accepted that person exactly as they are, not with the hope that, oh, they'll get better, they're going to act different, or they're going to be, something or someone else, or I want them to have a better career, or I want them to have this or that. I was in a situation where someone thought I was really immature and wasn't using my, degree the way I should. And that caused a lot of stress, because I just wanted to, I chose intentionally in my life not to have kids, not to be married before that. And I don't think that person really liked who I was, because in her eyes, I was like a teenager, whereas in my eyes, I'm like, well, I'm living in this world in the funnest way I can, and I don't have those responsibilities. So I don't have to live the way that other people live. So I think, in the end, that's what really, one of the things amongst others, but caused tension. So yeah, do you accept that person, or are you going to bug them to be something different?
Right. And
how do you feel about
have
that?
them bug you to be someone different, constantly putting pressure on you to, go do whatever it is that they have in mind for you.
But there are times when, there are people you want to be with who just, they're not at a point where maybe it would be better if they were. And so you bring that to their attention. Is that wrong? Does that mean you don't accept them for who they are? If you're I don't really want this dynamic, or I don't want this kind of thing, or I think you'd be happier with this.
I think it's different. Again, going back to this idea we talked about, I think it was in season 1, is really the difference between kind of behaviors and personality. If there's a way that someone is acting that isn't helpful or productive for the relationship, but it's changeable in a sense that it's I don't like it when you criticize me about my cooking or something. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. And then they can stop doing that. But if, you go after some kind of deep-seated piece of who they are and that just doesn't align with what you want, and they're not interested in moving forward with changing that, or don't see anything wrong with that, then I wouldn't let it go. I would move on. And I've had a partner who told me that my passion and zest for life was a downside. My overachieving ability and was a damper. And I thought, we are just not compatible because you want to subdue me. And that's not who I am. And so it's just more than a behavior. Like if she had just said, like, you work too much after hours.
Right.
That's something I can change.
Right.
But to tell me that something inherent in my personality doesn't align with what she wants and thought it was a downside hurt me to the point where I say, this is who I am. This is how I show up. And if you don't like it, then we're not a good fit because I'm not changing that. I love that about myself.
Yes. I think it's interesting. I think these questions are really about dating. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, that's a good point. Like, would you even enter into a relationship with someone who you didn't have this clarity on these questions, let alone like be a year in?
Well, remain in a relationship. Yeah. Exactly.
Like, I wouldn't be a year in and just start asking myself these questions and go, oh, this isn't what I want. Let's move to the next one. And this was, in this one we've talked a lot about just generally is like this idea of who am I? Like, do I know enough about who I am and what I want in life, my values, my non-negotiables? We've talked about the orange lines and the red lines and short and long-term goals. I mean, that's the question. Do I know what I want before I go and commit to somebody without knowing for sure?
Right. And again, I think it's like, why would you get married if you didn't know the answers to these questions? You know what I mean? Like, who's this article written for and who are we talking to? I mean, what does it even mean to be married? I think we need to take a step back. Like, are we talking the legality of it? Because that's where people get caught, right? That's where you become trapped. You're not trapped in a relationship unless it's abusive, but if you're just in a relationship, you can leave that relationship at any point. So if it's not working for you, you can leave it. So I think it is interesting that this is couched in marriage, whereas like I would answer all these questions way before I got to the question of marriage.
Well, you'd answer them in the first date with your couples therapist.
That's right. Exactly.
You and your first date.
But that's what I'm saying, right? Yep. Why? In fact, actually, I was with who was I with recently? Some friend, and they said, "Oh, I think relationships should all start out with a couples therapist." And I said, "Oh my God, that's what I say on the podcast all the time." Yeah. Because it is very difficult for two adults to get together and to, actually have things be smooth, right? So I think all of these questions should be asked way before even the discussion of marriage.
Right. Well, and then even further is continuing to ask yourself these questions because things also do change in the relationship. So at first you may have been very clear that you are, bringing out the best in each other, and then it sort of goes south. And so it's almost like you don't want to use it as a checklist. You want to use it as a continuing reflection and conversation. And these are kinds of things that I would say aren't just good to ask yourself, but they're good to ask your partner.
Well, they're good to ask together, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that we talk about it all the time, the Gottman, the 8 dates, but this is more, those are real serious, like big discussions, marriage, children, these are like questions you should be asking yourself on a regular basis or knowing about yourself and discussing with the person you're dating,
Exactly. And being very honest and transparent, because this next question here this is tricky. Am I happy to be in this relationship? If you're always fighting, you don't feel good about it. This article says it doesn't mean you have to bail. You could go to therapy, but it says if you continue to address the same things over and over and you're just unhappy, then you probably don't want to lean into committing to this person. And I would say, just like what you're saying, I wouldn't be at a point where I'm considering marriage at this point. If it's bad at the beginning, I'm not gonna continue with it.
I mean, people do all the time. And that's why I think this discussion about marriage is like, are people being pressured into getting married? I think that's more a thing for straight people. They get a lot more pressure to get married. I don't think I've not really met any gay people who were pressured into getting married, So it's like, my family has this expectation that I'm going to get married and have children as a straight person, and I think people let family determine a lot of that stuff,
Right.
And also the people who are conflict avoidant, they just don't want to leave. So even if they know they're unhappy, they either think it'll pass or they don't want to rock the boat. And I think a lot of people, I've heard this before, get married just to not rock the boat. And, well, it'll work out. So again, I feel like if you're going to even have a discussion about marriage, like you got to have a discussion about why you're even in that relationship. And if people can't sit down and literally sit together and go over these questions together, to me, that would be a red flag.
I would agree. And that really piggybacks on this next question, which, am I feeling trapped? Now, I think this is really interesting because, you used the word trapped earlier. I've written in my memoir about the idea of this kind of the legality of it is feeling trapped. But there's also this kind of self-entrapment, right? This idea of two things. One is you're logistically self-entrapped, meaning you have somehow relied on your partner so much that you've lost your job, you quit your job, and you're financially reliant on them, and you can't leave, or you think you can't leave, something like that. But the second one is something that I find more interesting, particularly being in my 50s now, is this idea of I feel trapped, but I'd rather be trapped than alone. And I've already invested like 2 years in this relationship, and this is going to be my person, because the alternative is that I give them up. I don't know if I'm going to find something better. I have to start over in the dating scene. Maybe I meet someone, and then I have to start that 2-year clock all over again. So I'd rather self-entrap so that I feel safe.
That's very grim.
It is, but I mean, I've seen it happen with so many people.
Yeah, I don't like that at all.
I know.
I mean, that's very sad to me. And everyone who believes that, who is a woman, should get on the Facebook solo over 50 travel, because a lot of people were in that situation, right? And that's why it's so interesting how travel, like taking a trip by yourself, can really open your eyes to what you want out of life and what you've been missing and what you won't tolerate anymore. And it's fascinating that it takes, have we talked about this on the podcast before? It's like when you travel, you have the freedom to be who you wanted to be, and you're not that same person at home. And so if you feel trapped, I mean, you should just get out, because, I mean, what's the most famous example of this? Eat, Pray, Love, right? Elizabeth Gilbert. She felt trapped. That's how she starts out her book. She was completely trapped. And I forget what she was trapped by. If she was trapped because she felt like she just had to stay in that marriage because she'd been married. And I think socially, there's a construct of, straight people get married and they have children, and that's how, we live in society. And so she jetted, she took off, right, to Italy, and then went around to India and then to Bali. But like, it's so interesting to me that continues. I just see that in these groups, right, that I'm on, these travel groups and stuff, that somehow leaving frees a lot of people from a lot of these constructs.
Right. But it's the fear of leaving for your own preservation, for your social status, for the logistics, or just, again, that fear that I'm not going to find somebody else. And so people stay. And so this should be, again, one of those questions you ask at the very beginning. If you're feeling trapped, like on date 3, then that's a really good reason to go, because the longer you stay in a relationship, the more emotionally and logistically invested you get into it. It's harder to get out. I mean,
but even people who are feeling trapped at 35 years, like I had a friend who was very, like everything he did was kind of the same all the time, right? He was a little bit boring, in my opinion, but we were friends. And he had the like boring parents who the dad had always worked at the same place, and the mom was the homemaker. And the mom left the dad at 35 years. And I was completely like shocked, as blindsided as my friend, and I didn't even know his parents, because I'm of the opinion that, my God, you made it 35 years and now you're walking out. Like, there's no hope for us. But here, okay, this is what this brings up, this discussion. Is there the one? Are we seeking in marriage? Does that mean we're marrying someone because we think that person's the one? And really, we're humans meant to be with one person for such a long time.
Well, I mean, that's a good question, right? I mean, I was reading the study the other day, and of course I can't cite it, which just makes me upset as a researcher and professor. But it was talking about the key to happiness is not thrill and adventure and passion and all of those things. It's actually contentment. And this idea of waking up every day and having it be sort of boring and predictable, yet enjoyable, right? But not like overly enjoyable, but that's the key to long-term happiness. But at the same time, you know,
Says who though? Because am I content in thrills and adventure and whatever? Yes.
Well,
so it's like, what is your view of contentment?
I mean, contentment by definition means more like a subdued underlying happiness.
Oh my God, I'll just slit my throat right now.
So, but I mean,
that's what I have to look forward to, that I wake up every day. No. See?
Well, I mean, but that's what I'm saying.
I'm like, my blood pressure is rising.
Yes, but that's what, by definition, contentment is sort of like just satisfaction. It isn't.
Who wrote that study? Hallmark?
I don't know, and I can't remember.
Hallmark Channel.
The point
Channel.
is that, you know, if you have a content marriage and you're 35 years in, and then you're like, you know, I want something more thrilling and adventurous, then people might leave. But sometimes it's the people who have been in for 35 years and have been miserable for 30 of them, and are just finally their kids are grown up, their kids are out of the house, they've you know, they're retired, or maybe something, and they just say, listen, I don't want to, like, I'm having a moment with my mortality. I can't possibly end my life without some great love, or, you know, so leave.
It would be interesting to do a study on the people, like this friend's parents, who this woman left the relationship. What happened, right? Was she happier? Was she not happier? Did she, you know what I mean? Like, that would be an interesting study.
Right. I mean, you look at how many people try to get back with exes, and that'll tell you a little bit about, you know.
Well, someone should study that. Why do they try to get back? Is it fear? Is it they saw the grass wasn't greener?
Right. And I'm sure there are studies about that, which would be interesting to look at. Let's move on to this next question here, because this is interesting. What am I doing to hold us back? Meaning, like, you're pushing your partner away, or you're putting up a wall, or you're making side comments, or you're running your avoidance. Some of this stuff goes into the attachment styles.
I was going to say.
So what am I doing to hold us back? Which, you know, this is a question that I hadn't really thought about. I thought about attachment styles in general, like what are our attachment styles, but particularly what might I be doing that kind of gets in the way? Have you ever thought about that kind of question?
It's a good question. Have I thought about it? I mean, I have. I've dealt with my attachment issues for the most part. I mean, they still flare up. And in this most recent relationship I got into, I had to call my therapist, I think twice at the beginning, because I was so freaked out. Like, I wanted to go back into my avoidant behavior, my disorganized attachment behavior, because the idea of being loved freaked me out so bad I wanted to run away. And I knew that I really didn't want to. I'm quite happy now, but like, that was my go-to, right?
Right.
And I mean, I think that these questions are good. And again, just for any relationship, any dating situation, because if you don't deal with your past stuff, it's going to come up, you know? Right. And having done all the therapy that I've done, when it came up in this relationship, I immediately sought, you know, the help of my therapist, right? Like to talk me out of that desire to run and panic, because what I felt was panic, you know? And so again, if this question, what are you doing to hold us back, or what's the other person doing, or what are you doing? I think two people who've done therapy are the best situated to be in a healthy relationship.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Well, and being able to recognize your triggers early on. I mean, for you, it's timing. Like, had you not been able to recognize that you were triggered and your response was panic, and you went and got assistance and you let that go for any amount of time, you could have sabotaged that relationship.
Oh yeah, I would have acted out big time.
Yeah. So part of it is just knowing kind of what those triggers are. I mean, we are never, ever free of baggage. We just have a better idea of what it is and what's in our suitcases and how we can recognize when it emerges. And I think that's the part is I'm much more aware of what my triggers are now. So if something comes up, I'm like, ooh, if I do this, I'm going to go down this path. This is probably how this is going to negatively affect this relationship. So I try not to, and I'm just more keenly aware. So I do think it's a good question.
But I think each time you deal with something that's baggage, if you deal with it in a productive way, then it lessens the impact each time. Because my current partner didn't even know that I had those panic freakouts, because I didn't act out. I went right to my therapist because I kept it internal. I went to my therapist, and then I was able to say later, I had to call my therapist and talk about these things. Versus in the past, what I would have done is start a huge fight and been like, goodbye.
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, that's good. And that's what happens too, is in your brain, you repattern.
Mm-hmm.
So, certain triggers come up over and over. What do they call it? Like, immersion therapy, right? Where like I'm afraid of snakes. So they put me in a big vat of snakes over and over and over again. I'll be less scared over time. Frankly, I will be dead from a heart attack from the very first time you put me in the snake pit. But the reality is like this idea of exposure therapy or immersion therapy, whatever it is, you end up by doing something or seeing something or having it happen, you do rewire your brain, you rewire your patterns and your responses. So absolutely that can happen. Let's move on to the next question. We've addressed this before as well, but I think this is a really interesting way of posing it is this relationship balanced? Balanced. Are we both sacrificing? Are we both putting in effort? Are we both offering support? Or is one person doing most of the giving and the providing and the supporting while the other one, this quote here is, quote, just sits with their hand out?
But it's like, if that is even the case, what are you doing there? Why would you even be contemplating marriage, right?
Right. Exactly. Well, and this says too, a relationship is 50-50 and should never be one-sided. Although I do disagree with that. I do believe that it fluctuates. So sometimes it might be 60-40. Sometimes it might be 40-60. It just has to, in the end, sort of equal out. But I do think there are points in time. I remember when my mother died about a year and a half ago, and it was absolutely devastating and heartbreaking. I could barely even get out of bed, and I've never felt like that before in my whole life. And I was so grateful to have a partner that just picked up the slack. I had my hand out for a while. I needed the help, but that's not the state that I'm always living in. And so there are other times that I might be the one who steps up and helps so I think that the idea is that it's equitable, not equal, meaning that you're both putting in what feels like it's supposed to happen at the time.
Right.
But I do think that you're right. If it's not balanced, why in the world would you stay?
Right. And that doesn't mean that, oh my God, your parent died and then you're like, oh, sorry, I can't vacuum the floor today. That's right. I mean, that's different than you're living with someone who never does anything, or you're dating someone who never does anything. And I think people do get in those relationships. Obviously, we see it all the time, and then they stay in them. So I would actually retitle this article. I mean, I guess they're trying to prevent people, which is good, from getting into it. I guess, if people will continue in these unhealthy relationships, I think a lot of times they think, oh, marriage will fix it, or things will be better when we're married. And then, that's, marriage isn't going to. Because what is marriage? And why do people's relationship change it from the time that they're dating or in a relationship to married? Why would marriage change anything? That's my question.
Right, exactly.
Does it?
I mean, in theory, it just codifies what you've
Would
already
it change
been doing.
anything for you?
I mean, legally, it would obviously change things. But I guess it depends on people who move in together when they're not married versus moving in when they, like people who get married and move in together. That's really what the big change is. But I don't know. I mean, part of it, and we've talked about this.
Here's the thing. Getting married, then you take on that person's debts that they accrue during the marriage, not.
I know. I don't have any interest in doing any of the
legalities. It puts you in a bad position. So I guess this article is really saying, are you with somebody who's going to put you in a worse position,
Right. I mean, could they also put you in a better one? I have no idea. But for me, it's not. I'm not interested in the legality of marriage. I don't like that. I don't. This is, and what I wanted to say was that, as a gay person who has been denied the ability to get married for so much during the beginning part and middle part of my adulthood, that it wasn't an option. We created the gay community and the LGBTQ community, created a lot of workarounds, right? Where we could sign legal paperwork, maybe in one paper at a time, or we figured out how to create commitments that didn't rely on the word marriage in order to basically say, we love each other and we want to be together forever. And so having that then given marriage, which I think is a really important milestone for the LGBTQ community to get, right, is to have access to marriage equality. I totally support that. But it's been interesting because I don't think for me that as a gay person, I was taught marriage is some kind of higher commitment than not marriage, because marriage was never accessible to me. So if I believed that at some point, I would then believe that whatever I had with my partner at the time was not as good as it could possibly have been, because I was denied the legal option of marriage. And so that's where I'm at. And so I sit with that kind of dissonance.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. Like, how can marriage change anything other than legalities?
And maybe it does for some. I've never seen it as kind of like the higher level. I think a long-term committed relationship where you love each other and you commit to each other can be as loving, maybe more loving. It just depends on the relationship. I
think for women, a lot of women, this is a feminist argument, it traps them, It's a dangerous institution for a lot of people around the world, particularly.
I mean,
and still in the United States and a lot of places in the United States. Like, if that's what I'm saying, if you're like thinking of marrying someone and you're just asking these questions, I think you're in deep trouble already.
Yeah.
These questions should really be asked way, way earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, at the end of it, a marriage is a legal binding contract. So just like you would think about signing a contract for a job or buying a house or going into business with somebody and you sign, corporate paperwork, you're signing a contract. And so if you want to abide by those terms and that contract is in your best interest, great. If it isn't, then maybe not. But the thing is that there's the idea of the legal marriage and emotional marriage, or for some people, spiritual marriage, has been conflated into one. And so the idea is if you don't have legal marriage, you somehow can't have the highest level of emotional or spiritual commitment that's possible. And that's, like I said, as a gay person, we've never had access to the legal part of it. Right. So we've always had to rely on the spiritual or the emotional part to be fulfilling. And so it is really interesting when you look at this idea of marriage and this idea, should I be in this at all? Let me totally switch gears on this. There's two questions here that I want to ask. They kind of go together. Can we have fun together, and can we have fun apart? What are your thoughts on that? We've talked a little bit before, or, certainly on our mini hikes, about interdependence and codependence and all of that stuff. What do you think?
Well, I mean, you better answer this question, and you better be able to do both, right? You better be able to have fun together, and you better be able to have fun apart. I just went away for the night with a friend. We did a bunch of hikes. We spent the night in Sedona. It was awesome. It was so much fun. We met new people. It was great. And then my partner was able to stay home and enjoy her alone time at home. And then when I came home, we had a great time, and we have fun together when we're doing things, but you can't be together all the time. It's not healthy.
Yep.
And you have to be able to go out with your friends. You have to be able to do your own thing if you want to be doing your alone time or whatever. And as I've said many times, like, I'm not giving up my pickleball. I'm not giving up my hiking, and I'm not giving up those things. And people keep asking me about, like, my, partner playing pickleball. And I'm like, like, she has her thing and I have my thing. And, oh, well, why aren't you riding bikes? She's riding bikes. I don't care. Like, I don't want to ride a bike. I was almost killed on a bike. I'm not interested. And I'm not going to give up pickleball. And, even with friends, they're trying to play with me. And I'm like, look, go take lessons first. Like, I'm not going to play with you. I played competitively, and that's it. And it sounds harsh, but that would ruin my time. And I'm really just upfront about that from the beginning. Like, you go get lessons. I'm not a teacher. Everyone who asks me to teach them something gets mad at me eventually about it, So have your own things. I mean, we talk about that all the time.
Right. Well, you're talking about, too, having your own things and then being very clear about where your boundaries are. Like, there are certain things, like, I like to go hiking, but I like to go at a certain pace. And so I appreciate, like, when you and I go hiking together, because sometimes I like to run up a mountain, and that's my thing. Right. It's not that I just like to go up the mountain. I like to run up the mountain, and that is my hobby. So that's important. I agree with you 100%. Let's look at some other things on this list. I'm going to kind of skip over this question because we've sort of talked about it, is why am I in this relationship, right? And that's really important. But this one right here is also, where is this going, right? Making sure that you're on the same page, you have similar expectations. We've seen it happen where people don't have a conversation about things like the 8 dates, like, do you want children,
Right.
or where do you want to live, or those kind of things, and end up like kind of blindsided after they're in deep into a relationship.
Well, that's the thing. Have all those conversations up front. Take a page from, the lesbian verse 12-hour date. Like, get it all out in the beginning. Like, talk about everything. Why are people afraid to talk about stuff?
I know. I think they're afraid that people aren't going to reject them. Or, there was a conversation the other day. Somebody was saying something. My memory, I'm telling you.
I know you asked me. Yeah, we got to talk about that later. Okay, bye.
So there was I think it was a TV show that I was watching. It was actually Love is Blind. And one of the women has a child, and she was talking about how soon should she bring up that she has a child.
Season 6. Uh-huh.
I don't know if you saw this. Yeah. I'm only on the first episode. But anyways, how soon should she bring up that she has a child?
Yeah. I thought she should say that step up front.
Right. Don't you think that's
I think so, but her philosophy was they should get to know her as a person because she's an awesome person, which I agree. She's an awesome person, but a child is a huge deal breaker for a lot of people. And then she's going to go down Heartbreak Road when people get attached. And then she's like, I have a child. And they're like, I don't want children, or I don't want somebody else's child. I mean, those are kind of
exactly.
People might think that's judgy of the person, but that person knows whether they want a kid or not, or they want to parent someone else's kid. Yep. I thought that was interesting because I watched that recently and I was like, lady, you're just going to set yourself up. Because you're going to get hurt. You're going to get attached. They're going to get attached. And then suddenly you drop a bombshell.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a bombshell. That should be upfront information.
And that's also an issue of trust, right? Why didn't you tell me this 6 dates ago?
Mm-hmm. And then she said, because I've watched further, like, the child is my greatest thing in life, my most important thing, my biggest, whatever. Well, okay, then you should be talking about that from the get-go. I think that's very interesting way to go about it. And I'm not going to give a spoiler alert, but,
La, 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 la.
Yeah, exactly.
I would agree.
That should be upfront. Boom. You should know that. And that goes for dating apps and not just TV shows. That information is very important to people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that is a huge, huge deal.
Yep. I would agree. So that goes kind of piggybacking on this other question, which again, I know we're going to say, why aren't we asking this before marriage? Why aren't we asking this on date 1, which is, do I really trust my partner? I mean, what kinds of things would come up for you that you would say, like, okay, if even at the beginning, like little things of trust that you're like, I don't really trust this person. Like, I'm not talking about massive infidelity or straight up lying. I'm talking about just, you can't trust your partner to, like, stop at the grocery store and pick up, food for dinner.
Well, that's different. That's reliable. Is the person reliable? Are they an airhead? Are they ADHD like me? Totally different.
I think that goes with trust, though, because you're trusting them with a task that they said they would complete, and it's on them.
That's a Virgo's view of the world. Even though I'm a Virgo, it turns out I'm actually more like a Leo. I don't agree. Those are two totally different things, because I can be the most trustworthy person in the world, which I am, because I'm completely upfront, honest, and loyal. But I'm just, you could tell me, go stop by and get this, and I would completely forget. In one ear, out the other.
I mean, I understand that there's
not because I don't respect the person.
Forgetfulness. But if I'm trusting that, like, I trusted you to, like, take my cat to the vet, and then you just forgot to take my cat to the vet, I can't trust you in the future to take my cat to the vet because you didn't follow through.
I disagree. So I think follow through and that's reliability, right? Now, if you came home and you said, did you take my cat to the vet? And they're like, oh my God, I totally forgot. I'm such an idiot. I got, sidetracked. That would be like, okay, God, I better have to set a reminder for them, or I better put a Post-it note or whatever, versus you come home and you say, did you take my cat to the vet? And they said, yeah, your cat's fine. And then you end up having to find out some other way that they never took the cat to the vet, or
well,
you get a call from your vet.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
but that's
lying. But
trustworthy.
But trustworthiness also includes reliability. If I can't trust you to do something you say you're going to do because you forget, that's not me. It's not my job to set your reminder. If you promise me you're going to take my cat to the vet and then you don't actually fulfill that promise, that's trustworthiness. And it's not my job to like send you multiple reminder texts or set an alarm on your phone. If you can't.
Yeah, but I agree with you. Well, no, I don't agree with you, but I agree. I understand what you're saying, that that's a hard thing for somebody to deal with, but I don't think that makes a person trustworthy. I think that makes a person reliable. I think those are two totally different things.
Well, I mean, by definition, reliability is part of trust. But I do know what you're saying, that part of it is like intention. You're looking at the intention behind it. Did I intentionally try to break your trust, or did I just forget? I get that. But I think what happens is the impact is the same. The cat didn't go to the vet. And if I ask you for something important in the future and I'm not sure that you can be reliable, then I can't trust you to do it. And therefore that's going to make me feel disconnected from you. And like, I can't ask you for support or guidance or help because I'm not sure you're going to be able to show up in a time of need. That to me is a problem.
Well, that's very interesting. I'm not sure. That's not that important to me. I like the reliability factor. I think there's a lot of things that go into that. I think there's things, I guess as a person with ADHD, pretty severe. It's not that I don't have the intention. I just don't have the follow through a lot of times. Versus someone who actually lies, you know?
Oh yeah, I would not even be with a liar at all. But
a lot of people do. They stay with people who have lied, and they think that, you know, that person won't lie in the future, which maybe that person won't lie in the future. But I just observed this recently with a friend, and there's trust issues going back to some lying that occurred at the beginning, and several years in, this is not over, and it just keeps coming up. And I've watched this cycle several times now, and I just ask the question, is this what you want? Is this the kind of cycle you want to be in? Nobody's wrong here, but it's not going away. And I think that breaking someone's trust versus is this person reliable or not? So different. And I don't think you can stay with someone, and people do it, but it causes a lot of resentment who's actually lying about stuff.
Right. Well, and I think this is a good example of what you and I both want and deem as trust might be different. And so I don't want to be in a relationship with someone who cannot follow through on what they said they were going to do. That is a violation of trust for me. And it's important that whoever I'm with understands that and perhaps feels the same way. And therefore we can have that kind of a relationship. And for you, it's important to be with somebody who doesn't have a philosophy like me. Because if I was let down all the time, even if it was just forgetfulness, I would feel hurt, even though it wasn't intentional. And so for you, this is why this is such a good question, because to talk about with your partner, what does trust even mean? Because our definitions of trust look really different. Right. And it's important to be with someone who either agrees with how you see trust, or you can at least understand and respect how each other sees trust and figure out a way to build a trusting relationship. So it's not a matter of who's right or wrong in this conversation. It's just a matter of the fact that you need to talk about this with your partner.
Well, and we've had this discussion before. It's not that one person is, you know, what they want is right or wrong. It's just if it doesn't match up, right? It's different.
Right, exactly.
And for me, that stuff you're talking about doesn't faze me. It wouldn't upset me. And I'm a person who probably has disappointed some people who are more like you, because I'm not good at follow through. So
yeah, that
I get, but I think we can all agree, and that everyone who's experienced someone who lies to them, it's hard to get past that trust, you know? And then you're like, because I dated someone who was lying, and it's like, why are you lying? Like, what purpose does it serve? And it will come, usually the person's found out to be lying, and then it's just awful. So,
well, and one lie leads to another lie. I mean, I've always been real horrible at lying, because I when I was a kid, I could lie, and then I would like try to remember what I lied about. So I'd have to lie again and again. and you just get into a loop, right? And it's not healthy for anybody.
Well, lying serves nobody. Nobody should lie. There's no point in lying. Just take your lumps. Like you do something wrong, own up to it.
Yep,
Yeah,
I agree.
Exactly. And then you say, oh, I'm sorry. I forgot about the vet. I got busy doing something,
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Sorry.
Okay. I'm going to jump to a couple other questions here. I'm going to skip these two because I feel like we've sort of talked about them. Am I with a good person? And am I attracted to my partner? I'm hoping that you like the person you're with and that you're attracted to them. So let's jump to this other question. Am I a parent or am I a partner? So when you feel like you're raising your partner, like maybe they're an unruly teenager or they act childish, and maybe even to the point where you even make comments about that, it can cause a rift. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on that? Have you ever parented or been parented by a partner before?
I have been, someone has attempted to parent me, but I don't go for that.
Okay.
And then I become very much like a, what do you call it? A teenager and who acts out.
Yep.
So I think, again, by having a lot of therapy, I'm no longer needing to be parented by anyone, actually. And so, and I don't act like an unruly teenager anymore.
So are you just clearer about who you are, or do you just set up boundaries at the beginning of a relationship and say, don't parent me, it doesn't work well?
I think it's more that I'm just really clear about who I am from the beginning. I don't, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to fit the mold that you think I should. And I'm actually not as emotionally immature as I used to be. I was so immature, in my 40s. I was truly like a teenager and emotionally, right? Like, yes, I wanted to live my lifestyle the way I wanted to live, but then in interpersonal relationship stuff, I acted like a child or a teenager because that's where my growth was stunted, due to my traumatic upbringing, that kind of stuff. And so without therapy, I wouldn't have understood that all my reactions were very teenager-like. And that doesn't go over well with a partner, especially a partner who's had a lot of therapy, especially one who's mature, emotionally mature. So again, everything happens for a reason in life, but looking back, a lot of things could be different in my life had I started therapy when I was in my teens or early 20s. Mm-hmm. It would have changed the whole trajectory of my life. But, you can't live. All you can do with that information, I think it's the same for a lot of people, is to say, well, you start now, you do better now. It is what it is, and you just have to go forward because there's no going back.
Yep. Well, and I think it's important, in addition to recognize like who you are and your own background and your baggage or whatever you may have, is also being aware of the dynamic that is set up. So, for instance, if you have a situation where one partner is more like neat and tidy, or one partner is more, like organized,
emotionally available,
or any of these things, right? Whatever it is,
right?
And then ends up feeling like they have to step in and do more because the other person isn't, and not because they don't want to, but that's just not the way that they live. And so it ends up being like a parental type of a relationship. So like, I've had situations where, I parented a partner, where the dynamic, it was our dynamic. It was because of who we are and how we came into the relationship with very different expectations, that because my expectations were higher, I ended up putting those upon my partner, and that basically came off as parenting. And so instead of saying this is your fault, it was the dynamic. And we never really had addressed the dynamic before and saying, okay, what is it about who we are that we bring into this relationship that is causing this cycle? Because it just sort of developed. And I think it's important to be able to recognize that cycle and then go break the cycle, instead of putting it on, you're doing too much of this and you're not doing enough of this, which is where we often will go with the blame game. And the idea is it's the cycle, and you need to either be with somebody who kind of, sees and navigates the world like you do, or if you don't, you need to be very like conversational about what it is you need to do and set some real expectations. Okay, these are the things that out of all the expectations I have, these are the 5 things that matter. I promise I won't bug you about the other 25 things. And then, whatever that is, but, whether it's talking with a therapist or just having that conversation, but I think it's important to also recognize that it takes 2 to tango a little bit here.
But I think 2 mature, emotionally mature adults aren't going to get into a relationship where you have the parent-child dynamic. And I don't think 2 people who are in a parent-child dynamic should get married, period. They need to get a lot of therapy and get out of that, because that's just gross and it doesn't serve anybody.
Right.
And
exactly.
It's not to say that it can't change within your relationship, but if you're going to go making such a serious decision as getting married, that should be fixed.
Yeah. And again,
first.
I say go to therapy or do whatever you need to do to discuss the dynamic. What is it that's contributing to this cycle? Because you can't, it's once you parent, as somebody who's done it, once you parent on one thing, it makes it easier to parent on another and another and another. And then it becomes this like endless loop. And so breaking that dynamic.
It's a dynamic, right? An unhealthy dynamic. That's
exactly.
the thing.
Exactly. Okay. A couple more questions as we kind of round it out. Let's see. This one is a good one. This is, does my partner have my back, or do you feel like they throw you under the bus? I don't know.
What does that mean, thrown under the bus? I think, again, this list is like unhealthy dynamics. You should have figured this out before you decided you're going to get married.
Right.
Like, if you feel like your partner's doing that, which I have been accused of doing that in a past relationship because I was so immature and I'm an oversharer. And so my partner felt like my oversharing or my sharing, I consider it to be sharing, was like oversharing for her. It's like too much sharing of stuff. That to her felt like being thrown under the bus, right? Where I have a totally different definition and belief about that stuff. So again, it doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong about how much to disclose to other people in the world, but it's like, do these things match up? And if someone is critical of you in front of others all the time, if someone is like putting you down, I mean, you shouldn't be in that relationship.
Right. Or talk to them and say, I don't like it when you do this. This hurts me. Stop. Please stop doing this.
Well, and if they don't stop, then they're not hearing you.
Then you
go. Not respecting you.
Yeah, exactly. They're not respecting you on 2 levels. Right.
Don't make it worse by marrying them.
They're not respecting you because they're continuing to make fun of you in front of people, and they're not respecting you because you asked them to stop and they're still doing it. So yeah, I
think we just need to write to this person and say, you should change the title of your article. Do not marry someone until you can honestly answer these questions. To do not continue to date someone.
Right. Don't go on a second date with someone if you can't answer these questions. Okay. I'm going to jump to just the last couple. There's one is, are we looking in the same direction? That one we've sort of talked about. And we've also talked about, are we growing together, and am I still me? And I think we've really addressed those, right? Just holding on to kind of your own independence and having like this idea that you want to grow and learn and develop. But I'm going to ask you, this is number 20, and this is really, really good because this is definitely up our alley, is what is my gut telling me?
Well, always listen to your gut. And you should read the book, The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. It's mostly about women's safety. And I think that given that, intimate partner violence is the number 1 cause of death of women in the United States, if you are not completely feeling secure in your relationship in any way, in any of these questions, don't go forward. There's nothing wrong with putting a stop to it. It's not that you have to break up, but you have to say, look, we need to get therapy to move forward. We need to work on these things to move forward. I think people are afraid to do that, and they need to not be. They need to talk about everything.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, is sometimes people like me recognize red flags and don't do anything about it because we hope that they're just going to go away, or they're a one-time thing, or that maybe we're seeing something that really isn't an issue, or making a mountain out of a molehill, whatever it is. So we dismiss them. And I've done this before, even though my gut was saying one thing. I just was like, no. And my rational brain was trying to talk me out of it. And, if if you look at some things, your resources around intuition and gut, really there's a lot about it that's actually spot on. I mean, there's even research that's being done in the business sector that's talking about how CEOs are making less data-driven decisions and they're making more gut instinct decisions. Like CEOs who say they were going to, all the data points that they should merge with another company, but the night before they have this just eerie feeling they shouldn't, and then they decide not to, and then all of a sudden the other company goes bankrupt. Like these are, the gut is really strong because the gut just really pulls from, your instinct and some of the things that you might have collected in your head that you're not letting your subconscious really think about. And that's how red flags work is, all of those red flags go into your brain and then your gut pulls from those and gets a sense of those. And so I think that honestly, out of all these questions, the gut is probably one of the most important things because I think it sums up all of this. You can say, oh, my gut feels like I can't trust this person, or my gut feels like, they're going to cheat on me, or my gut. And you don't want to like anticipate so much that you ruin a relationship, but your gut is probably going to tell you some things that your brain won't let you know.
Right. Agree 100%. Trust your gut always.
Trust your gut. All right.
For women's safety and everything.
Everything. Well, and those are the 20 questions. So in summation, I think we have a couple things here. One is make sure that you're on the same page as your partner about how you define things, about what your expectations are. I mean, all of that. We've come to that conclusion. The second thing is these are questions you should be asking way before you're considering getting married. Way before. Okay. So if you could add a couple questions, you don't have to answer them, but what would those questions be?
Mine would all be legal.
Legal. Okay.
Are you going to do a, what's that thing called? Oh my God. No, your memory problems have affected me. Are you going to do a prenup?
Okay.
Anyone can do a prenup. Does this person have debt issues? Are you going to, when you get into a relationship with them, are their spending habits going to become your problem? I think a person who's really considering marriage needs to look at all of the legal ramifications of marriage. And then look at that person's behavior and say, could this person put me in jeopardy? Because once you're legally married, you're on the hook for a lot of that person's behavior. And that is scary.
Yeah, so I would agree.
That's what I would add.
Because
you can't prenup your way out of their debt, FYI. No. Their debt becomes your debt. Not debt that they accrued prior to marriage, but debt that they incur during marriage. And here's what I see with a lot of women, particularly, they have no idea what these usually men are out doing. And it can be bad. I mean, it can be gambling debt. It can be prostitution use, things like that. And that comes back to you. I mean, marriage is a very, very serious thing to actually enter into.
Well, I've heard it where one partner maybe has the joint credit card and goes out and buys a whole bunch of stuff. And since they're the one who pays the bills, the other person doesn't see that they've accrued $100,000 on the credit card.
Well, there's something, right? Here, this is a whole nother class that we could have or talk about is what do you do in a marriage? You should not ever let someone else have control over your finances or have the ability to sully your credit record, your credit score, or be purchasing anything in your name. I mean, that's the thing. I think a lot of people give up control over these very basic things that then cause them a massive amount of harm and like years and so much money out of their pocket. We've seen it in some of our own friends, and it is terrifying. I was fortunate, to have been legally married to someone very fiscally responsible, and I'm very fiscally responsible. It's not like I have any money, but I don't waste any either. And I certainly would never put myself or another person in debt. And, we don't have debtor's prison here, but when people are in debt, they do feel like they're imprisoned, and that's what you're taking on. I think that's the thing. People don't realize marriage, because this is what's so interesting to me. When you go to get married, it's very easy to get a license, right? Boom, go down, pay your $200. Married, much harder to get divorced. Much more expensive.
The state has an interest in you staying together in a familial relationship, and that's why they make it so difficult. But, and I think it's interesting because the argument against what you're saying, although I actually agree with what you're saying, the argument is that by combining finances and by getting a joint credit card, you are showing the highest level of like trust that you can in your partner. Like if you're in a relationship and you don't trust them to make money decisions, then you shouldn't be trusting them to be in a relationship with you.
agree, but we see that people, they bypass that or ignore that all the time.
Yeah.
And, honestly, that is, having, as an attorney, what I see is pretty shocking. Women give up a lot of, and particularly women give up a lot of power to someone else.
Yeah. Well,
and you shouldn't do it whether your partner is male or female. Like, if you're really going to join things, financial things with somebody, then you both should have access to everything, and you should see each other's credit scores. Is it Susie Orman or somebody else is like, see that person's credit score?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
interesting. Well, I would say if I were to add some questions on here, they would definitely have to do with things around like my own readiness to get married, right? Am I in a place where I feel like I can come together and share my life, share my space, share my time, have someone, that I might have to compromise with or talk to? This is interesting. It's like, you've said it before, is like have someone else that you need to consider before making decisions. Like, am I in a place?
But doesn't that count just for living? Aren't these all the same for just living together?
It's for all of these things. But my point is that I think that there's some line of questions that I think would be important to also ask that aren't on this list, whether you ask them on the first date or not, is, am I even ready or willing to do what it takes to be in a long-term partnership? Because if I'm not ready to share my space and I'm not ready to share my time, and I'm going to be really kind of selfish about what I want, which is totally fine. You've earned it. You can do that. Right. But if I'm not ready to do that, then I'm not in a place where it doesn't matter how great or awesome the other person is. It's like, I'm not in a place where I can show up, and what I would be giving in a partnership wouldn't be fair to the other person. And I would know it. I'm not interested. I'm not willing, Well,
that's what always shocks me. People who get married who really want to be a playboy or playgirl or whatever.
Yeah.
Why? Just be single, for the love of God.
Yeah.
I think there's so much social pressure to say you're monogamous or be monogamous or commit to the serious relationship when you really don't have to. You can be whatever you want to be.
Exactly. Well, and some people want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have someone to come home to that's going to make them dinner and then go live the life that they want. And the reality is that's just unequal. That's where we talk about that balance in the relationship. So
true. So you better ask all these questions right away. That's
exactly. Ask these questions. Well, we'll put the questions in the show notes because, Tracy, you and I aren't married or in a romantic relationship, but this was a good conversation between you and I, even as a friendship, to kind of see what our similarities and differences are on some of these things, because I think that these are also could be used for friendships. Why am I in this friendship? Where's this friendship going? Can I trust this person? Do we, well,
I think this is interesting for you as a professor also of Gen Z stuff. Like, is it changing? Like, are people's attitudes towards marriage changing? Is this something like, we're over 50-year-old lesbians, right? So we have for most of our lives, we weren't allowed to get married. But all these people now who can be married, whatever their, sexual orientation is, do they even want to be?
Mm-hmm.
Is this an attractive institution?
Right. And if it is, what makes it attractive and what doesn't make it attractive? And it is fascinating. We could do a whole episode just on marriage equality. But certainly the lack of marriage equality for you and I for most of our adulthood to date was that we weren't permitted to get married. And so it's really interesting to come into philosophies around an institution that we were neglected for so long. And then, it's like, there are some things I don't see the merit in, only because when I was little, I didn't cut out pictures from Bride magazine and, put them in a collage, because I always knew there was, something different about me. And I never imagined myself as the bride with the groom. And so that wasn't my dream. So then all of a sudden I'm handed this right, which is awesome. And many people sacrificed for that right. But it's hard to switch the mindset to catch up and say, okay, what is it about this institution that is so alluring since I was denied it for so long?
Yeah. And I entered into it. I was married and I never thought that I would get married. And now I'm a divorcee, a 50-something-year-old divorcee.
You are among 50% of the American populace now.
Well,
yeah.
Finally, I get to be in the majority group.
Exactly. All right. Well, Tracy, it has been lovely talking about all of this stuff with you. Again, I thank you. And thanks to all of our listeners who tune in wholeheartedly to hear Tracy's and my opinions on all of these things. And we hope that this generates conversation with you within yourself or with your partner, with your therapist, with your friends, just to talk about some of the things that we talked about, because I think there's some merit in just being able to talk about the questions, not necessarily even answer them, which of course is a bonus as well. But until we are back on with you again, make sure that you go out there and rock those relationships. If you liked what you heard, check out our show notes for resources from today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Rock That Relationship, and go to our website at rockthatrelationship.com for updated episodes and more great information.
Thanks for listening. Now go rock those relationships.